The wind was screaming that night. Not whistling, not howling, screaming. The kind of sound that doesn't pass through the air, but tears straight through the bones. Snow whipped across the frozen lake in endless spirals, a white storm swallowing the world whole. I shouldn't have been there. No one sane crossed the frost veil during a blizzard. The ice could crack, the wind could flay skin raw, and the cold didn't kill quickly. It crept inside, took its time, and turned your heart into glass. But I was searching. Herbs, frozen wolfsbane roots, anything I could trade for food or firewood. The forest had been stripped bare weeks ago. The lake was my last hope. I pressed forward, boots crunching over brittle frost, breath fogging the air like smoke. And then I heard it. A sound so faint, I thought the wind was playing tricks. At first, it was only a whimper, distant, uncertain, swallowed by the storm. I froze, head tilted, heart racing. Then it came again, a sharp, desperate cry. Not human, not animal, something between. A pup. Impossible, I whispered, clutching my cloak tighter. No creature survived this far north, not in this weather. But the cry came again, clearer this time, and God's help me, I ran toward it. The snow blinded me, shards of ice cutting across my cheeks. My boots slipped on the glassy surface as I reached the center of the lake. The sound was louder now, rising from beneath my feet. I dropped to my knees and brushed away the powdery snow and froze. There, under the translucent sheet of ice, a small figure thrashed weakly. A pup, no older than 4 winters, his fur slick with freezing water. His tiny hands beat against the ice, eyes wide with terror. The ice was too thick to break by hand. I could already see his movements slowing the water, claiming him inch by inch. "Hold on," I breathed. "Please, just hold on." Logic screamed for me to run. The healer's mind in me knew what this meant. The water, the cold, the cost. But the wolf in me, the one that still remembered the heat of a pack long gone, didn't care. I pulled my dagger from my belt and began to strike. The first hit did nothing. The second cracked the surface. The third, a spider web of fractures shot outward, and the ice groaned beneath me. "Come on," I hissed through clenched teeth. "Come on." The blade struck again, harder this time, and the world gave way. The lake opened beneath me, swallowing me whole. The shock was instant. The cold wasn't just cold, it was pain, pure and total, stabbing into my lungs, my skull, my spine. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe, only move. The current dragged me down, churning shards of ice around me like claws. My cloak tangled at my legs. I tore it off and kicked upward, hands groping blindly in the dark water until fur. I grabbed the pup by instinct, pulling him against my chest. He was limp now, weightless, a flicker of life fading too fast. My lungs screamed for air. My vision went black at the edges. I pushed toward the faint shimmer of moonlight above, muscles burning, the cold cutting through every layer of skin and will. When my head broke the surface, I gasped a sound that wasn't breath, it was survival. The air tore down my throat like knives. The hole in the ice was already freezing over. I used my elbows, my nails, anything to drag us up. My fingers bled, skin tearing against the shards. But finally we broke through. I collapsed onto the surface, coughing, trembling uncontrollably. The pup lay still beside me, his fur stiff with frost. I pressed 2 fingers to his throat. Nothing. "No," I whispered, shaking him gently. "No, no, no." I cupped my hands over his chest, breathing warmth into him, over and over until my lips went numb. "Come on, little one," I begged. "You survived the ice. Don't die now." For a moment, nothing, just the wind and my own breaking heart. Then a gasp. A small, shuddering inhale. His chest rose weakly beneath my palms. His eyes fluttered open, not blue, not brown, but silver. My breath caught. I knew that color. Every wolf in the north knew it. The mark of the royal bloodline. The Alpha King's son. He whimpered, and I gathered him into my arms, clutching him to my chest as the storm howled around us. The world was spinning, my body numb, but I didn't let go. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled a hunting call, close enough to shake the ground beneath me. Shh, I whispered, pressing my cheek against his frozen hair. You're safe. I've got you. The ice beneath us groaned, threatening another collapse. But I didn't care. All I could see were those silver eyes, fragile, flickering, alive. And all I could think was this. Whatever I had just saved, it wasn't just a pup. It was the heartbeat of a kingdom. I remember little of the hours that followed the rescue. Only that the world had turned to noise, wolves howling, boots crunching through snow, the distant crack of branches as the search party approached. I was still kneeling by the fire pit I'd managed to light beneath the cliffside, shivering so hard that my bones felt like glass clinking inside me. The pup, his pup, lay wrapped in my cloak beside the flames, small enough to fit in both my hands. He breathed shallowly but steadily now. Every exhale was a puff of white mist in the freezing dark. I had stripped down to my undershirt, my soaked clothes steaming beside the fire. My fingers were raw from breaking the ice, my skin pale and torn. But I didn't move. I kept one hand over his chest, counting the faint rhythm of his heart. When I finally heard them, it wasn't just wolves I sensed. It was power. It came like thunder rolling through the ground, dozens of boots striking in unison, the crunch of snow beneath disciplined march, and then the low growl that wasn't human. The kind that could command mountains. Kneel. The wind shifted, and the scent hit me: smoke, pine, and iron. Authority. I turned my head as shadows broke through the tree line. The Alpha King had come. He rode at the front, his black cloak whipping in the storm. His hair, dark as frostbitten bark, was pulled back from a face carved in fury. His eyes, gods, those eyes burned silver, just like the child's. He dismounted before the others even stopped moving, boots striking the ground like the fall of judgment itself. Guards followed close behind, but he didn't need them. The air itself obeyed him. Where is he? His voice wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. I couldn't speak at first. My throat was too dry, my pulse too loud. I only gestured weakly to the small figure beside the fire. The king strode past me and dropped to one knee beside his son. The rage melted from his face in an instant, replaced by something rawer, quieter terror. Lyric, he breathed. The name trembled in the air, breaking something inside me. He lifted the pup into his arms with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man like him. His fingers brushed through the boy's hair, checking for breath, for warmth. When Lyric stirred faintly, a tiny sound escaping his lips, I saw the king close his eyes for half a heartbeat, a man caught between relief and heartbreak. He's alive, I said softly, though it came out more as a rasp. He looked up then at me. It was like being struck. Those silver eyes found mine, scanning every inch of me with an intensity that made the cold feel merciful. He stood slowly, his son still in his arms. Who are you? Mira, I managed. Just a traveler. I heard him cry. The ice. You dove into the lake, one of his guards interrupted, stepping closer, disbelief sharp in his voice. In this storm? I nodded. Would you rather I let him drown? A murmur rippled through the guards, but the king silenced them with a single glance. His focus never left me. You could have died, he said, voice low, controlled. I almost did. The words hung there, bare and unashamed. For a moment, the corners of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but not anger either. Why? He asked simply. I frowned, not understanding. Why what? Why save him? It was such a strange question that I almost laughed. Because he was drowning, I said. Because he's a child. Because no one else did. The silence that followed was heavy. The snow kept falling, but softer now, as if the storm itself were listening. He studied me like a puzzle he couldn't solve. Then his jaw tightened, and something in his expression shifted: confusion, giving way to suspicion. You're no traveler. My breath caught. He took a step closer, his gaze narrowing. I wanted to move, but my body was frozen in more ways than one. The air between us crackled alpha dominance, meeting something older, quieter, but unyielding. His nostrils flared, and then I saw it: recognition. His voice dropped to a whisper, dangerous and quiet. I know that scent. I blinked, unsure I'd heard right. What? He inhaled again, and the fury returned like fire catching wind. His grip on his son tightened, though his control didn't slip. "Not yet." "You," he said, the word sharp as a blade. "The healer from the eastern border, the one who served my queen the night she died." My stomach turned to ice. He didn't let me finish. "The traitor." The accusation hit harder than the cold ever could. Around him, his guards stiffened, hands going to their weapons. "I didn't." I started, but my voice broke. He stepped closer until I could feel the heat of his breath. His eyes burned brighter than the fire behind me. "My mate died with your hands on her," he said softly. "Deadly. And now you think fate will let me believe you saved my son out of kindness?" I met his gaze, trembling but unflinching. "Believe what you want, Your Majesty. But your son is alive, because I didn't stop." Something flickered in his expression. Something like restraint. He exhaled slowly, silver mist curling from his lips. "Then you'll stay," he said finally, "until I decide what you're worth, healer or murderer." And with that, he turned toward the horizon, his son still safe in his arms, leaving me kneeling beside the dying fire, my past roaring back to life like a curse I'd thought long buried. When I woke, I thought I was buried alive. The air was thick, hot, and scented with smoke and pine. My body ached in a dozen places, ribs bruised, fingers bandaged, hair still crusted with frost. The last thing I remembered was the Alpha King's voice cutting through the snow like steel. Now, I was in his den. Stone walls surrounded me, carved with runes that glowed faintly in the firelight. Heavy pelts hung from the ceiling, muffling the sound of the storm outside. It was too warm, suffocatingly so, after the lake's merciless cold. And then I saw him. The Alpha King sat across the room, back turned to the fire, silver eyes fixed on me like a wolf studying prey. He wasn't wearing armor this time, just a dark tunic that still carried the sharp scent of pine and steel. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "You should be dead." My voice was rough when I answered. "I've been told that before." He rose from his chair, the movement fluid, deliberate. Everything about him was even his fury. He walked toward me with the kind of control that was more dangerous than rage itself. "You expect me to believe," he said quietly, "that you just happened to be at the edge of the Frostvale during a blizzard? That you risked your life for a child you didn't know?" His tone wasn't loud, but it filled the room like a growl. I pushed myself up on the bed, ignoring the sharp pull in my muscles. "Believe what you want." He stopped a few feet away, arms crossed. "You were exiled. Branded a traitor. A healer who let a queen die under her hands." The accusation was like a slap, even though I'd heard it 100 times before. I steadied my voice. "I didn't let her die. She was poisoned long before I touched her." "Convenient," he said coldly. "True," I countered. That earned me a flash of teeth, not a smile, not quite anger, something in between. "You speak boldly for someone standing in the den of the wolf who condemned her." "I speak because I'm tired of silence," I said. "I spent years being hunted for a lie. I'm done begging for anyone's belief, even yours." His jaw tightened. The fire crackled between us, throwing shadows across his face. "You're either the most foolish Omega I've ever met," he murmured, "or the bravest. Maybe both." That seemed to disarm him for a moment. His gaze softened just barely before hardening again. "Tell me then," he said. "Why save him? Why save my son?" I met his eyes, because no one else did. The words came out quieter than I expected, but they hit the air like an arrow. He blinked, the faintest flicker of something crossing his face, disbelief, maybe even guilt. I continued, voice steady now. "I found him beneath the ice. The guards were too far, the storm too loud. I didn't think, I just moved. He was cold, and small, and crying, and gods, forgive me. I couldn't watch another child die when I could stop it." For a moment, the room went still. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. The king didn't speak right away. He looked at me, really looked, and I saw something shifting behind the anger. Not trust, not yet, but something human. When he finally spoke, his tone had changed. Lower, calmer. You could have let him drown, and no one would have blamed you. I would have, I said simply. He studied me for a long time, then turned away, pacing slowly toward the fire. You don't fear me. I've already faced worse than death. He exhaled, a sound caught between frustration and curiosity. You think you know what kind of man I am? I know grief when I see it, I said softly. It looks the same on every face. That stopped him. He turned, eyes sharp again, but not cold. Careful, healer. You tread on memories you don't understand. Maybe, I said. But you're not the only one haunted by ghosts. For a heartbeat, silence again. Then a sound I hadn't expected. A low, bitter laugh. You have spirit, he said, shaking his head. I can't decide if I despise it or admire it. Why not both? I asked. That almost earned a smile. Almost. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, the mark of a warrior, the mark of survival. You'll stay here, he said finally. I frowned. In the fortress? Yes. His tone left no room for argument. Until I know what you are, savior or deceiver, I won't risk my son again. You think I'd harm him? I think you're a puzzle, he said, and puzzles can be dangerous. He turned to leave, the weight of command following him like a shadow, but at the doorway, he paused. You'll have food, warmth, and a guard at your door. Consider it royal supervision. Supervision? I echoed. You mean imprisonment? He didn't look back. Call it what you like. But you're still alive, healer. For now, that's more than you deserve. The door closed behind him, and I was left alone in the silence of the Alpha's den, a ghost given breath, a traitor given shelter, and a wolf who should have died but didn't. They locked me in a room fit for a queen. It should have felt like a kindness, the soft furs, the golden hearth, the walls carved with the sigils of the Northern Line. But to me, it felt like a cage dressed in velvet. Every breath carried the scent of iron and pine, the Alpha King's mark upon his fortress. They said I was under royal supervision. What they meant was watched. Guards stood at my door, silent as statues. Every sound I made echoed in the stone like a confession. I counted the hours by the crackling of the fire, the drip of melting snow from the roof. Until he came, lyric. The door creaked one morning, and instead of soldiers, a tiny shadow slipped through a boy no taller than my waist. Bundled in wool and fur, his silver eyes wide as moons, he looked at me as though he'd stumbled into a fairy tale he wasn't sure he believed in. You're the lady who saved me, he said softly. His voice was gentle, uncertain, the same sound I'd heard beneath the ice. I suppose I am, I said, setting down the book I'd been pretending to read. He came closer, small boots sinking into the furs, studying me like I was some kind of rare animal. Father said you're dangerous. A humorless smile touched my lips. He's not wrong. He giggled, the sound light and sharp as wind chimes. You don't look dangerous. Neither did the storm, I said. That earned another laugh, bright enough to cut through the gloom of the room. He wandered toward the hearth and crouched beside it, small fingers tracing the edge of the stone. I watched him quietly. His movements were careful, deliberate, like someone who'd learned not to touch things he shouldn't. After a while, he glanced at me again. Does it hurt? What? When you fall into the lake. I blinked. It hurts a little less than freezing to death. He frowned at that, clearly unsatisfied. Then why did you do it? Because I couldn't bear another voice fading into silence. Because I've already buried one child. Because I needed to save something. Even if it wasn't me. But all I said was, because no one else did. He seemed to think about that for a long time. Then, carefully, he took one of the small carved wolves from the mantel and held it out to me. This one's brave, he said. Like you. I stared at it, a rough little carving, uneven and simple, probably shaped by his tiny hands. I took it gently. Thank you. His grin was all teeth and warmth, and just like that, the room didn't feel so heavy anymore. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm: lessons, meals, long silences broken by bursts of laughter. Lyric became my constant visitor. We fed the crows that perched on the window ledge. We played with the small wooden soldiers he snuck from his father's study. I told him stories about the southern woods, about constellations that sang and rivers that glowed blue under moonlight. He listened with that wide-eyed awe only children have, the kind that reminded me too much of someone I'd lost. My sister, Ayla. She had the same questions, the same fearless curiosity, the same way of tugging at your sleeve when you tried to stay silent too long. Lyric had her eyes, too bright with wonder, untarnished by cruelty. One evening, when he fell asleep curled against the fur rug, I found myself tracing his hair back from his forehead and whispering, "You shouldn't trust me, little wolf." He stirred, but didn't wake. "I've brought ruin to everyone I tried to save," I murmured. "Don't let me do the same to you." But even as I said it, I knew it was already too late. The boy had thawed something inside me I didn't know could still melt. That night, I wasn't the only one watching. When the candles had burned low and the fire turned to embers, I sensed a presence beyond the door. The faintest shift of weight, the hush of breath controlled, disciplined, impossible to mistake. Thorn. I didn't move, didn't look up. I kept my hand resting over Lyric's sleeping form, pretending I didn't know, but I could feel his gaze. Heavy, conflicted, dangerous. He stood there for a long time, long enough for me to feel the heat of his anger mingled with something else, something softer, something he was too proud to name. When the door finally closed, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The next morning, Lyric found me sitting by the window, sunlight spilling through the frost-patterned glass. He rubbed his eyes sleepily and smiled. "Good morning, Mother," he said. I froze. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. "Lyric," I said carefully, "you mean Mira." He shook his head. "Stubborn in that innocent way, only children can be." "No, you're warm like her. Father said she was gone, but maybe she came back as you." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. My throat tightened instead. "I'm not your mother, little one." He frowned. "You saved me." His words were simple, but they carved something deep into me, deeper than I was ready to face. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and soundless. And somewhere down the hall, I could feel Thorn's presence. Still watching. Still listening. The fortress had walls of stone, but the real danger was what was breaking inside them. Because when Lyric called me mother, I didn't correct him again. I just let the silence hold it. The morning began with silence, the kind that isn't peace, but warning. From my window, the northern sky was iron gray, the fortress wrapped in frost. Below, I could see the courtyard filling with carriages and banners. The council had arrived. I'd heard the whispers long before the summons came, that the king's court wanted my head. The nobles had been patient while I nursed his heir back to life. But patience in the north always has a limit. And that limit, it seemed, had finally broken. By noon, I was escorted through the great corridor toward the war chamber, the heart of the Alpha King's power. My guards didn't speak, they didn't need to. Their silence told me everything. Inside, the council hall was a storm contained in stone. Dozens of lords stood in a half-circle around the king's throne, their furs trimmed in gold and arrogance. At their center sat Thorn, shoulders squared, face unreadable, the weight of a kingdom resting behind his eyes. When I entered, every head turned. Whispers rippled through the room: the traitor, the healer, the witch who killed the queen. I kept my chin high. If they wanted to see fear, they would have to earn it. One of the elders, Lord Bryn, a man whose beard seemed older than mercy, stepped forward first. "Your Majesty," he began, voice like gravel, "it is an insult to this court that she still breathes. You swore vengeance for the queen's death, and yet here stands the woman who let her die." A murmur of agreement followed, another voice sharper, younger. "If it were any other wolf, she'd have been executed the night she entered these gates. The people whisper that the king has gone soft, that grief has blinded him." Thorn said nothing. His eyes, fixed on me, gave nothing away. I almost pitied him. "Almost," Lord Bryn continued, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. She's cursed, my king. She brings ruin wherever she walks. Her presence defies the laws of the moon court. For the safety of the realm, she must die. My heart thudded, but I refused to look away. Thorn rose from his throne slowly. The sound of it, the scrape of wood, the shift of his cloak silenced the room. Enough, he said. The word hit like thunder. He descended the steps until he stood between me and the council. His gaze swept across them, cold and deliberate. You speak of law and safety, he said. Yet not one of you was there when the frost veil broke. Not one of you dragged my son from the jaws of the lake. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Lord Bryn's face reddened. With respect, Majesty. Thorn cut him off, voice hardening. You forget your place, Bryn. You forget mine. The elder flinched but did not retreat. And what of justice? The queen's blood is not hers to atone for. That silenced him. The air crackled with disbelief. Thorn's voice dropped, deep and deliberate. She saved my blood. She stays. The declaration rang through the hall like a blade striking stone. Gasps followed, then outrage. Your Majesty, this is madness. You would trust the woman who betrayed your mate? She's bewitched you. Enough. This time, the word was a growl. The sound of it made the torches flicker. Thorn's wolf was close to the surface, now every syllable a warning. You forget what it means to question your king in his own hall. The chamber fell silent again, but the silence was poisonous. I could feel their eyes burning into me, the woman who had divided the king's court. Thorn turned toward me then, his expression unreadable. You'll remain under my command, he said. You'll live here, serve here, until I decide otherwise. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt the chains tighten, because this wasn't mercy. It was possession. The nobles bowed stiffly, anger simmering beneath obedience. I could see alliances fracture in real time, old loyalties cracking like thin ice. When the council dispersed, Thorn lingered by the fire, staring into it like a man trying to burn away his own thoughts. I hesitated at the threshold, unsure whether to thank him or curse him. Finally, I said, You've made enemies for me. He didn't look up. They were enemies long before you came. You simply gave them a reason to speak. His tone was even, but the muscle in his jaw twitched, the only sign of the storm beneath. Why defend me? I asked quietly. He finally turned, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw exhaustion the kind born, not from war, but from too much restraint. Because, he said, you did what none of them ever would. You ran into the storm when the rest of us froze. I wanted to believe him. Gods, I wanted to, but I saw something else in his eyes, something that told me this wasn't redemption. It was guilt. Reshaped into duty. He dismissed me with a nod, and the guards led me back through the corridors. The fortress felt colder than before. I realized, as the doors closed behind me, that whatever fate I'd escaped on the lake, I'd only traded it for another, a gilded cage, bound not by steel, but by the will of the man who had once destroyed my life. And now, by his own command, I would never be free of him again. The fortress is never truly silent. Even when the torches burn low, and the guards change posts, there's always something breathing in the stone, an echo, a whisper, a memory that refuses to die. I've started to learn its rhythms, the creak of the north tower at dawn, the groan of the iron gates when the wind turns, the murmur of ghosts that live between walls, carved long before my exile. I should be sleeping. But tonight, the moon sits heavy and pale above the ramparts, too bright for dreams. So I walk. The corridors stretch long and cold, draped with banners bearing the silver wolf of the Alpha line. Each step echoes on the marble floor, soft and hollow, the sound of someone who doesn't belong. I turn a corner and stop short. A room lies open ahead, doors unguarded, the scent of lilac faint in the air, a fragrance out of place in a fortress ruled by men and war. I shouldn't enter. Every instinct warns me to turn back. But my hands move before my reason catches up. Inside, moonlight pours through tall windows onto a chamber preserved in stillness. A gown lies folded across a chair, pale as frost. Jewelry gleams on a vanity, delicate rings, silver combs. A harp sits by the window, untouched, its strings catching the faint hum of wind. I don't need to ask whose room this is. The Queen's. Thorn's mate. The woman I failed to save. My chest tightens. It feels wrong to be here, like trespassing in a sacred grave. but something pulls me forward, something deeper than curiosity. My fingers graze the edge of the harp. The note it gives off is soft, hollow, and lonely. I remember her laughter, then faint, musical, just like this sound. She had been kind, kinder than I deserved, and I had watched her die. The memory hits with brutal clarity, her pale face bathed in lantern light, her pulse fading under my hands. The poison already too deep. The metallic taste of blood and herbs on my tongue, my voice breaking as I begged her to hold on. And behind her bed the shadow of a king who refused to cry. "Get out," he had said that night, his voice nothing but ruin. "Get out before I make you follow her." He had never asked what happened. Never wanted to hear the truth. Until now, I realize. Tracing the harp string one more time. The sound, trembling through the air like a heartbeat. "You shouldn't be here." The voice behind me is low, rough, the kind that can freeze air. I turn. Thorn stands in the doorway, the moonlight carving sharp edges into his face. His coat hangs open, a sign he wasn't expecting company. But his eyes, those eyes burn with 1,000 unspoken things. I couldn't sleep, I manage. His gaze flicks to the harp, to my hand still resting on it. "Neither could she," he says quietly. "She used to play when the moon was full." "She loved this room," I whisper, unsure why I'm speaking at all. It feels alive. He walks further in, stopping a few feet away. "I kept it this way," he admits. "I thought if I changed anything, I might forget her scent." He looks toward the vanity, the brush, the perfume, the folded gown, but it's fading anyway. Something in his voice catches, and for the first time since I met him, the armor cracks. Not much, just enough for me to see the man beneath the king. "I never meant for her to die," I say before I can stop myself. The confession slips out like a wound reopening. I gave her everything I had, every herb, every spell I knew. It wasn't enough. He studies me, unreadable. "You think I don't know that?" I blink. "You?" He cuts me off, voice softer now. "I blamed you because I needed someone to hate more than myself. I left her alone that night. If I'd come back sooner." He doesn't finish. He doesn't have to. The silence does it for him. The fire in the hearth burns low, its glow painting him in bronze and shadow. I realize then that grief has eaten us both, only in different directions. "I'm sorry," I whisper, "for what it's worth." He nods once, like a man accepting a truth he's fought too long to deny. "And I'm sorry," he says finally, "for the exile. For everything." The air feels lighter after that, not forgiving. Not yet. But less suffocating. For a moment, I think I see it in his face too, relief, fragile as frost. But then it changes. His eyes narrow, head turning toward the window. "Do you hear that?" he asks. I hold my breath. At first, I hear nothing but the whisper of wind. Then faintly the sound cuts through the night like a thread of glass. A howl, low, close. Wrong. Not the voice of a pack wolf. Thorn's posture shifts instantly, all warmth gone, every line of his body hard with instinct. "That came from the east wing," he says. "Lyric's quarters." Ice floods my veins. Before I can move, he's already gone. The door slamming open, his footsteps fading into the corridor. The howl comes again, sharper this time, a predator's cry, not a warning but a promise. I follow, heart pounding. Because whatever ghost had been haunting these halls just took shape, and it was hunting the king's son. Snow burns when it's fresh. Most people don't realize that. They think of it as soft, clean, but when it touches skin raw from cold, it sears like fire. I learned that once before, on the lake. I was learning it again now. The scream that tore through the corridor wasn't human. It was the sound of something wild, metal and blood and fury wrapped into one. "Lyric." My voice broke as I ran. The hallways blurred, torches stretching like streaks of flame. When I burst through the east doors, the cold hit me like a wall. The snow was coming down in blinding sheets, swallowing the courtyard in white. The guards were already moving, weapons drawn, but they were too slow. I saw him, the boy half buried near the stables, a dark figure crouched above him. The scent hit first. Iron and rot. "Rogue, move!" I shouted. but they hesitated. One heartbeat too long. I didn't. I threw myself forward, boots slipping across the ice. The rogue turned, snarling fangs black with blood, eyes glowing red. Its claws came down. I caught them with my bare hands. Pain exploded up my arms, but I didn't care. I pushed back with every ounce of strength I had left, shoving the creature off the boy. It hit the ground, rolling, growling, the sound bubbling like broken glass. Lyric, I gasped, crawling toward him. His tiny chest heaved shallowly, his lips blue. A thin line of crimson stained the snow beneath him. No, not again. I pressed my palms to his ribs, ignoring the heat that pulsed beneath my skin, that old forbidden hum that used to wake the forest spirits. The one I'd promised never to use again. Not here, not in front of them. But he was dying, and I couldn't lose another child. Breathe, I whispered, closing my eyes. Come back to me, little wolf. The air changed. The snow stilled. Light spilled from my hands, faint at first, then brighter, threads of silver weaving through the air, curling around his small frame like ribbons of moonlight. The ground itself seemed to tremble, the ice glowing faintly beneath us. The magic wasn't wolf or seer, it was both. The forbidden kind that belonged to no tribe and every curse. Breathe, I whispered again. And he did. His chest arched, a sharp inhale, a gasp alive. His eyes flew open, silver brighter than before. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the heat of tears freeze against my cheeks. A shadow fell over me. By the moon, Thorn's voice. Rough. Staggered. When I looked up, the king stood among his men, eyes wide with something between horror and awe. I staggered to my feet, my hands still glowing faintly. The light flickered, then died, leaving only the smell of burnt frost. She's... One of the guards began, voice shaking. She's not wolf. Half, another spat. Half, seer. It's her kind that cursed the northern bloodlines. That poison killed the queen. Their words sliced through the air, heavy with superstition and hate. Thorn said nothing. He just looked at me, really looked as though seeing me for the first time. His eyes flicked from my face to my hands, to Lyric now breathing softly against the snow. Mira, he said slowly. What are you? I forced myself to meet his gaze. The same as I was before your court called me a murderer. He took a step closer, snow crunching under his boots. And what exactly is that? I'm someone who saves people while your soldiers stand frozen. The words came out sharp, brittle. I didn't mean for them to sound like defiance, but they did. Around us, the guards shifted uneasily, hands on their weapons. The scent of fear was thick enough to taste. She used witchcraft, one barked. The boy's soul could be bound. Enough. Thorn's roar silenced them. It wasn't loud, but it carried power, the kind that made the very snow still. He looked down at Lyric, then at me again, jaw tight. Something warred behind his eyes, reason against instinct, grief against command. Finally, he said, she stays. The same words he'd used in the council hall, but this time, they sounded different, heavier. She saved my son again, he said, voice echoing across the courtyard. And if her power threatens this pack, then it will be my burden to carry. He turned to me then, closing the distance until I could feel his breath in the cold. From this night forward, Mira of No Pack, you are under royal protection. I blinked. Protection? His gaze locked on mine. Until I can decide what to do with you. He reached out, not roughly, not gently, and brushed his thumb against my wrist. A faint heat bloomed there, then spread. His mark, silver, faintly glowing, shaped like a crescent fang, burned itself into my skin. The bond of an alpha's claim. The guards fell silent, shock rippling through them like wind. They knew what that mark meant, what it cost. He'd bound me to him. Not as a prisoner. Not as a free wolf, but as something in between, a ward of the throne. I felt the pull of it instantly, that strange hum in my blood, the instinct that whispered belong. Thorn's voice broke the silence. Anyone who harms her harms me. Then he turned away, lifting Lyric into his arms. The snow fell heavier now, thick and soundless. The rogue's body lay forgotten on the ice, blood already disappearing beneath the storm. I stared at the mark on my wrist, glowing faintly through the frost. He'd called it protection, but it felt like a chain shaped like a promise and a curse. The mark wouldn't stop burning. Days had passed since the attack, but the faint crescent on my wrist still glowed when I touched it. A silent brand, the Alpha Kings claim. It hummed under my skin like a pulse that wasn't mine, a reminder that my life no longer belonged entirely to me. The fortress had changed too. The guards who once ignored me now bowed stiffly, eyes downcast. Servants whispered when I passed. I wasn't invisible anymore, I was untouchable, and somehow that felt worse. Thorn's protection came with its own kind of isolation. He hadn't spoken to me since the night of the attack. Orders went through attendants, messages through servants. I was given a new room, finer robes, more space, all the trappings of privilege wrapped around the silence of captivity. By the fourth evening, I'd had enough. I found him in the training yard, the moon high and white above us, painting the snow in silver light. He was alone, shirtless, despite the cold, swinging a sword heavy enough to split stone. Each movement was precise, almost graceful control, disguised as violence. "You shouldn't be out here," he said without turning. "The storm's coming back." "You shouldn't decide where I can go," I said. The blade froze mid-swing. He turned slowly, eyes catching the moonlight, molten silver, calm but dangerous. "Careful, Mira." "I'm done being careful," I said, stepping closer. "You marked me without asking. You called it protection, but I know a cage when I see one." His jaw tightened. "If I hadn't, you'd be dead by morning. Half the court wants your head." "And you think branding me with yours makes me safer?" I asked, my voice breaking. "You promised I'd never leave your side. But tell me, Thorn, is that a vow or a prison sentence?" The question hung in the air between us, trembling like the edge of a blade. He lowered his sword, but the tension in him didn't fade. "You think I wanted this?" he said, voice low, rough. "You think I enjoy binding anyone to me?" "Then why do it?" I demanded. "Because you can't stand not having control? Because you couldn't bear the thought of a woman defying you?" His eyes darkened, but his voice didn't rise. It sank instead, softer, heavier. "Because I've already lost one I couldn't protect." The words hit, like a crack through glass. He stepped closer, slow, measured, until the cold air between us turned warm. "You think I don't know what I've done? I killed my own sleep the night I branded you. But I can't." He stopped, jaw working, searching for words. "I can't lose you, Mira." "You don't have me to lose," I whispered. He gave a humorless laugh, short, bitter. "You don't understand. When the queen died, the world fell silent. I thought I'd never feel anything again. And then you." His gaze flicked to my wrist, to the faint mark glowing beneath the moonlight. "You walked back into my life like a storm. You brought my son back from death. You made me remember what it means to feel fear again, and I hate it." "Then unmark me," I said. He shook his head once. "I can't." I wanted to scream. "Can't or won't?" "Both," he said, stepping closer still. "Because every time I think of you outside these walls, I see another body in the snow. I see another grave I can't fill." My chest ached. "You're not protecting me, Thorn. You're protecting your guilt." His breath caught. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. The moonlight painted him in silver and shadow, a king made of regret and iron. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "Maybe that's true. But I'd rather be your jailer than your mourner." Something inside me snapped. I pushed him hard, but he didn't move. His hand caught my wrist, not roughly, but firm enough that the mark flared to life again. The heat coursed through me, dizzying, infuriating. "Let me go," I said, though the words trembled. He didn't. His voice broke on a single word. "No." The world went very quiet after that. Just the wind, the crackle of ice, and the sound of our hearts uneven, reckless, too human. He was close enough that I could see the scar along his jaw, the faint tremor in his throat as he swallowed whatever war was raging inside him. "I don't want this," I whispered. He met my gaze, eyes raw and unguarded. "Neither do I." Then the distance between us disappeared. It wasn't gentle, it was desperate, defiant, like both of us were drowning and reaching for the same air. His hand slid up to my neck, my fingers tangled in his hair, and for one suspended moment, everything stopped: the war, the guilt, the ghosts. It wasn't love, not yet. It was grief finding a heartbeat. When we finally broke apart, breathless, the mark on my wrist pulsed once, binding what the world would soon call fate. He looked at me, eyes burning with something that terrified us both. "This," he said quietly, voice rough. "This is why I'm afraid to let you go." And before I could answer, the first thunder of the coming storm rolled across the mountains, echoing the truth neither of us dared speak. We were already lost. The great hall of Frostvale Keep was transformed into a cathedral of power. The banners of a dozen northern packs hung from the rafters, black, silver, crimson, all stitched with wolves mid-snarl. The annual gathering of alphas was meant to honor unity, but it looked more like preparation for war. I stood beside Thorn on the dais, the mark on my wrist burning faintly beneath my sleeve. I'd been dressed in ceremonial white, a healer's color, though everyone here knew I was no ordinary healer anymore. Half seer, half wolf. Half truth, half curse. The murmur of voices rippled through the crowd like the wind before a storm. Thorn rose from his throne, and the room fell to silence. His voice carried with the weight of command. "Brothers, sisters, elders of the North," he began. "We gather under the ice moon to reaffirm our oaths of peace and strength. But tonight, I bring before you a truth the old laws would have buried." 100 eyes turned to me. "She stands here as proof that power can come from both bloodlines wolf and seer," he said. "She has healed the wounded, saved my son, and defied death itself, and I will not allow our fear of the past to condemn her." A low growl rippled from the back of the room. Lord Bryn again, the same elder who had demanded my execution weeks ago. "Your Majesty," he said, stepping forward, his voice cutting through the hush. "You speak of healing, but what you parade before us is witchcraft. This woman channels the dead. The laws forbidding her kind were written in blood for a reason." Another voice joined him, a matriarch from the Western Range, sharp as a blade. "Our ancestors burned the seers who cursed our packs. Have you forgotten how the queen died? Poison in her veins, spell work on her skin?" The hall erupted. Cries overlapped, accusations flew like knives. Words like witch, curse, and abomination rang through the air. I stood still, the noise washing over me, like surf against rock. My palms were sweating, but my voice, when it came, was steady. "If I were what you claim," I said, stepping forward, "your king would already be dead." That silenced them. Even Thorn looked at me, startled. I held the crowd's gaze. "I have lived among wolves my entire life. You fear what you don't understand, but fear is not law. Fear is cowardice wearing a crown, gasps, whispers, the kind that can turn to violence." Thorn's hand tightened on the armrest of his throne. But he didn't stop me. Then, from somewhere near the front of the court, a small voice rose above the chaos. "Stop yelling at her." Every head turned. Lyric had stepped out from behind the dais, his small hands balled into fists, his chin trembling but held high. "She saved me twice," he shouted. "She's not bad. She's good. She's my friend." The hall went still. The boy's words cut deeper than any decree. He looked at his father, then back at the council, defiant in the way only innocence can be. "You all bow to my father," he said, voice quivering but brave. "So maybe you should listen when he says she stays." The silence that followed was alive, not peace, but shock. Thorn rose slowly, pride flickering in his expression. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder, steadying him. "Wisdom," he said quietly, "can come from any mouth, even one still growing teeth." It would have ended there, perhaps. The murmurs were softening, the danger fading. But then, from the shadows near the elder's bench, another voice spoke, brittle, ancient, trembling with something darker than age. "I remember the night the queen died," said Elder Corin, one of the oldest seers to survive the purges. His eyes were clouded, but sharp beneath the milky haze. "I was there when her body was brought to the altar. I saw the poison's mark, and it was no witch's doing." A ripple tore through the hall. Thorn turned sharply. "What are you saying?" Corin stepped forward, leaning heavily on his cane. "You blamed the healer because she was easy to hate. But the truth, my king, is far crueler." His eyes lifted toward the dais, toward Thorn himself. The toxin that killed your mate was made inside this fortress, by hands that bore the royal crest. The words hit like thunder. No, Thorn said, voice low, dangerous. Yes, Corin rasped. Someone in your own house murdered your queen. Gasps rippled across the court. The air grew colder, tighter. I felt it then, the shift in Thorn's energy. The pulse of his wolf clawing to the surface. His hand went to his chest, as if the truth itself had struck there. And beneath the noise, beneath the chaos, I realized something chilling. Corin wasn't looking at Thorn when he said royal house. He was looking at me. The chamber erupted, guards shouting. Alphas rising, the world blurring into motion, but all I could hear was the echo of the old man's voice, someone inside the royal house. My blood turned to ice, because, even though I didn't yet understand why, deep inside I knew whatever truth he had unearthed, it was going to destroy us all. The wind over Frostvale carried secrets that night, cold, sharp things that whispered through the halls like ghosts trying to be heard. After the council's revelation, the fortress felt different. Every corridor held a shadow too still, every glance lingered too long. The truth Corin spoke had taken root in everyone's mind. The queen was murdered by someone inside the royal house. But it wasn't just rumor anymore. I had proof. It began with the scent. A faint trace of wolfsbane oil, the rare, refined kind used only by those who worked in the royal armory. It shouldn't have been anywhere near the queen's chamber, and yet I found it on an old vial stored in the healer's apothecary, sealed under the wrong name. The crest etched into the glass was unmistakable. The same sigil I'd seen on Lord Garen's blade, Thorn's brother. His only living blood. When I told Thorn, his face went pale as ash. For a moment, I thought he'd kill me for saying it. Then, quietly, he said, "Show me." We moved under cover of night. No guards, no councilmen, just the king and the branded woman who no longer knew if she was his prisoner or his ally. The old chapel sat beneath the fortress, carved into the mountain's spine, a relic from before the first wolf kings. The air was cold enough to freeze breath midair, the walls lined with broken statues and rusted offering bowls. Thorn carried a torch. I carried the fear he wouldn't admit. As we descended the steps, he spoke at last. "He was a child when our father died," he said. "I raised him as my own. If you're wrong..." "I'm not," I whispered. "The scent doesn't lie." He didn't respond, but his jaw clenched. The flame in his hand wavered, throwing long shadows across the stone. We reached the bottom. The chapel's door was ajar. Inside, the air smelled of iron and incense. Candles burned along the altar freshly lit. Someone had been here recently. Thorn's voice dropped to a growl. "He's here." We stepped inside. The light danced over a figure kneeling at the altar, his cloak deep crimson, hair silver as frost. "Brother," Thorn said, voice like thunder cracking the sky. Lord Garen turned slowly. His eyes once warm were hollow, gleaming with something feral. "Thorn," he said, almost softly. "You shouldn't have come." "Tell me it isn't true." A faint smile curved Garen's lips. "If it makes you sleep easier, I could." Thorn's knuckles went white on the hilt of his sword. "You poisoned her." "I freed her," Garen said simply. "You don't remember what she was becoming. She was going to hand our bloodline to the seers to them." His gaze flicked to me, burning with hatred. Her healer was the first link in that chain. My pulse pounded. "You murdered your queen to stop an alliance." "I saved our pack," he shouted. "The seers would have ruled us through her blood." "You think the moon's blessing is pure? It's corruption wearing divinity's mask." "Enough," Thorn roared, the sound shaking the walls. But Garen only laughed. "You mark her, you defend her, and you think you're not already cursed?" I saw it then, the glint of steel as he drew his blade, faster than breath. The torchlight caught its edge, turning it into a streak of white fire. He lunged. Thorn moved, but I was closer. Instinct took over, the same instinct that had driven me into the lake, that had saved Lyric. I threw myself between them. Pain bloomed like light. The blade cut deep across my ribs, cold and bright, the air leaving my lungs in a single soundless gasp. "Mira!" Thorn caught me as I fell, his arms iron around me, the torch tumbling from his hand. It hit the ground, scattering sparks that danced across the old chapel floor. The world tilted. My vision blurred Thorn's face above me, Garen's voice distant and shaking. "You never saw it, brother," Garen said, breath ragged. "You never saw how easily love becomes poison." Thorn's growl rose, low and lethal. "You killed my mate. You almost killed my son. And now—" His eyes glowed silver, his wolf breaking through. The next sound was metal striking flesh, a roar swallowed by the walls, and then silence heavy and final. When I blinked again, Garen was on the floor. The snow outside howled through the broken door, carrying the smell of blood and iron. Thorn's hand pressed against my wound, his voice a blur. "Stay with me, Mira, stay." I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't form. All I managed was a whisper. "The lake." He frowned. "What?" "The lake is cracking." And it was. I could hear it deep beneath the mountain, a rumble like the heartbeat of the world breaking open. Because truth, once freed, doesn't stay buried. The ice beneath the fortress beneath us had begun to fracture, and somewhere in that sound, I realized this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything we'd been trying to deny. I don't remember the moment pain became silence, only the cold. It crawled up from my wound like frost across glass, slow, deliberate, merciless. I could feel it spreading beneath my skin, threading through my veins like winter-made flesh. Somewhere above me, Thorn was shouting my name, but his voice sounded distant, like thunder rolling through water. Then the world shook. The torchlight flared, throwing the chapel into chaos. Garen had risen again, blood on his blade, eyes feral with madness. His laughter echoed off the walls, jagged and broken. "You'll lose her, brother," he spat, "just as you lost her." Thorn's roar was nothing human. The sound tore through the chamber, shaking the frost from the ceiling. I'd heard wolves howl in grief before, but this was different. This was the sound of a god remembering what it meant to burn. Light erupted around him, golden, searing, alive. The air thickened, heat clashing against the cold like the collision of worlds. His form twisted, bones reshaping, muscles shuddering beneath his skin. And then the Alpha King was gone. In his place stood the wolf. Massive, terrifying, beautiful. His fur burned like molten iron, streaked with ash and silver, eyes pure light. The chapel's walls groaned beneath the weight of his fury as his claws struck the floor, sending sparks skittering across the stone. Garen faltered, his arrogance flickering for the first time. "Brother." The word didn't finish. Thorn lunged. The clash was a blur of fire and snow claws and steel, growls and screams. Every strike sent shockwaves through the room. The temperature swung violently, frost cracking, flames devouring the edges of the altar. I tried to rise, but the pain dragged me back down. My blood steamed against the floor, hissing where it met the heat. The world spun the wolf's fury, painting streaks of light through my vision. Garen fought like a man possessed, but Thorn's rage was older, deeper. He slammed his brother into the wall, stone splintering beneath the impact. "You killed her," Thorn growled, the words thick and distorted through his half-shifted throat. "You killed everything." Garen laughed again, breathless, delirious. "And still you couldn't save what you loved." The blade in his hand flashed once, but Thorn was faster. His jaws closed around Garen's arm, bones cracking, blood spilling hot across the snow that had drifted through the broken doors. The scent of iron filled the air. "Thorn." I tried to speak, but the sound was no more than a whisper. He didn't hear me. The final strike came like lightning. The wolf's claws cut through armor, through hate, through years of guilt. Garen fell, eyes wide, not in fear, but in recognition. "You finally chose," he murmured, voice shaking as blood pooled beneath him. "Her, or me." Then he was still. The fire dimmed. The snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting through the shattered ceiling, landing on the bodies, on the broken altar, on my hands. Thorn turned toward me, his wolf form fading, flesh reshaping with the sound of bones knitting and breath returning. He stumbled once, then crossed the floor in 3 strides, falling to his knees beside me. "Mira," he whispered, voice raw, trembling. His hands hovered over my wound, uncertain, desperate. "You're freezing. Gods, You're freezing. The cold had reached my chest now, creeping up like a tide. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. I tried to smile. Seems the ice has a fondness for me. Don't, he said, voice breaking. Don't talk like that. He lifted me, arms firm but gentle, as if afraid I might shatter. My head rested against his shoulder, the warmth of him radiating through the thin layer of my dress. I could feel the tremor in his body, the rage still trembling beneath his skin, fighting to be held back. Where are we going? I asked faintly. He didn't answer. His steps were uneven as he carried me through the snow-choked corridors, out of the chapel, into the storm. The wind hit us like a wall. I could see the horizon flickering fire against white. The fortress burned behind us, its highest tower wreathed in smoke. Thorn's breath came hard, his voice low against my hair. You saved my son from this lake once, he said. I won't let it take you too. And then I saw it, the lake, vast and gleaming under the ice moon. The same place where this story began, where life and death had shared a single heartbeat. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface now, glowing faintly blue beneath the snow. The sound of it was haunting the earth itself mourning. Thorn waded into the shallows, the water hissing where it met his skin. He laid me down on the bank, the warmth of his hand never leaving mine. I swore I'd never lose another life to ice, he said softly, voice shaking. Not my queen, not you. His tears fell warm on my cheek, the first I'd ever seen from him. The storm howled above, the fire of the fortress reflecting off the lake's cracked surface fire over ice, and as the world blurred, I felt the faint echo of the mark on my wrist glow once more, answering his touch, his grief, his vow. If this was the end, it was almost beautiful, because for the first time since I could remember, I wasn't running from death. I was being carried toward love. The first thing I felt was warmth, not the fragile kind that flickers and fades, but the deep, living kind that sinks beneath the skin, the warmth of sunlight after too many nights of cold. I opened my eyes to brightness. The ceiling above me was unfamiliar smooth wood, not stone. The scent of pine and smoke lingered faintly in the air. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming. Then I heard it. Birds, not the harsh caws of crows, but the soft trill of spring songbirds. Spring. I sat up slowly, wincing as my body protested. The wound that had once burned like ice now only ached faintly, a dull, stubborn memory. I was wrapped in furs, though I barely needed them. The chill that had gripped Frostvale for months was gone. Through the open window, I could see sunlight breaking over green hills, where snow had melted into silver streams. The lake, the cursed, frozen lake, glimmered in the distance, no longer bound by ice. It rippled gold beneath the morning Sunday, the world had thawed. I took a breath, and for the first time in what felt like years, the air didn't hurt. Careful. The voice came from the doorway. Thorn stood there, dressed in dark leathers, hair still damp from the wind. He looked different, or maybe it was me who'd changed. The lines of grief that had once carved his face were softer now, replaced by something steadier, quieter. You should be resting, he said. I've done enough resting to last a lifetime, I murmured. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that belonged to the man beneath the crown, not the king. You've been asleep for 2 days. The healer said it was your body recovering from the frost. I touched my ribs, tracing the faint scar beneath my skin. It feels distant, like it happened to someone else. You nearly died, Mira. I nearly do that a lot, I said softly. He exhaled, shaking his head, but I caught the edge of something else in his eyes, awe, or perhaps disbelief. When I pulled you from the lake, he said, I thought the gods were cruel, to bring me to the same place where everything I loved had once been taken. He stepped closer, his voice lowering. But when I carried you back, the ice began to break. The lake melted. I blinked. You mean? He nodded. The curse is gone. The storms have stopped. Frostvale's rivers are flowing again. They're calling it the spring of the healer. The words hit something deep in me. I looked back out the window, at the sunlight spilling across the fields, at the shimmer of dew on the grass. I had never realized how hungry I was for color until that moment. It wasn't just me, I said quietly. The land healed because you did. He frowned, but didn't argue. You give me too much credit. No, I whispered. You give yourself too little. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was soft like breath shared between two people who had survived too much to need words. Then, slowly, Thorn knelt beside my bed. Not the way kings kneel to gods, but the way a man kneels to truth. His hand found mine, his touch warm and steady. You dragged my son from death, he said, voice rough but sure. And me from it too. I felt the sting of tears before I could stop them. You make it sound like I performed miracles. He looked up, eyes glinting in the golden light. You did. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The world outside hummed with life-melting streams, birdsong, the gentle rustle of wind through the open window. When he finally stood, I followed him outside. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. The fortress courtyard once buried under snow was alive again. Flowers pushed through the soil, shy and trembling. Soldiers had shed their cloaks, laughing freely for the first time in months. And there, at the edge of the meadow, a small figure ran across the grass, arms open, laughter echoing through the morning. Lyric. He sprinted toward me, sunlight in his hair, cheeks flushed with life. I bent down just in time for him to crash into me, his tiny arms wrapping around my waist. You're awake, he shouted, his joy uncontainable. Father said you were sleeping because you were growing new magic. I laughed, the sound strange and wonderful in my throat. Did he now? Thorn stood a few steps behind, watching us with an expression that held everything words could not: gratitude, reverence, something close to peace. Lyric turned toward him, calling out, Come see, Father. Look, the flowers are waking up. Thorn walked over slowly, crouching beside us. His hand brushed over mine where it rested on Lyric's shoulder. They're not the only ones. The three of us stayed there for a long time, the king, the healer, and the child who had tied our fates together. The sun rose higher, gilding the fields, reflecting off the lake that once tried to claim us all. The last of the frost cracked and vanished into water. And in that quiet, I realized what spring really meant. It wasn't just the end of winter, it was the promise that even the coldest hearts could learn to breathe again. Thorn squeezed my hand once, softly. Winter's over, he said. I looked out at the green fields, at the child chasing sunlight, and smiled. No, I whispered. It's finally begun.